The fluorescent lights hum in the maternity ward of Hospital General de Morelia, Michoacán. It's July 14th, 1982, 3 days after baby Mateo Cervantes was born. His mother, Lucía, age 23, lies in the recovery room, her body still weak from a cesarean delivery. She asks the nurse when they'll bring her son for feeding. The nurse checks the chart, frowns, says she'll return in a moment. She never does. When Lucia's husband Raúl arrives that evening with carnations wrapped in newspaper, he finds his wife hysterical, security guards in the corridor, and an empty bassinet. Baby Mateo, 4 kilograms, brown eyes, a birthmark shaped like a comma on his left shoulder, has vanished. For 40 years, Lucía would search. And in 1997, a forgotten roll of film found in a retired administrator's desk drawer would reveal what really happened that summer afternoon. Lucía Ortega met Raúl Cervantes in 1979 at a textile factory on the outskirts of Morelia. She worked quality control. He drove deliveries. They married the following spring in a small chapel with bougainvillea climbing the walls. The ceremony was simple: 30 guests, homemade food, mariachi musicians borrowed from Raúl's cousin. They danced until midnight. Lucía wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit. Raúl wore a borrowed suit that smelled of camphor. They spent their wedding night in a hotel near the bus station, counting their gift money on the bed, planning their future. By early 1982, Lucía was pregnant. They lived in a 2-room house with a corrugated tin roof near the railroad tracks. The trains passed at dawn and dusk, shaking the walls, rattling the windows. The neighborhood was working class: mechanics, seamstresses, factory laborers. Children played soccer in the unpaved streets. Women hung laundry on lines strung between houses. Raúl built a wooden crib from pine planks he salvaged from the factory. He sanded it smooth, painted it white. Lucía sewed tiny shirts from fabric scraps she brought home in her purse. Blue and yellow. She didn't know if the baby would be a boy or girl, so she made both colors. They named the baby Mateo, after Raúl's father, who died in 1975 working construction in Guadalajara. A beam had fallen. Raúl was 19 when it happened. He never got to say goodbye. Naming the baby Mateo felt like bringing something back. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. Lucía's blood pressure climbed in the second trimester. The doctor at the public clinic prescribed rest, reduced salt, weekly checkups. Lucía tried, but the factory wouldn't give her time off. She worked standing 9 hours a day, inspecting seams. Her ankles swelled, her head pounded. Raúl begged her to quit. They needed the money. Her paycheck covered rent and groceries. His covered utilities and the crib and the tiny shirts. By July, the doctor was worried. He admitted Lucía to Hospital General de Morelia for monitoring. She spent 4 days in a shared room with 3 other pregnant women. The hospital was understaffed, under-resourced. Nurses worked double shifts, equipment was outdated, but it was free, and that mattered. Labor started on the evening of July 10th. Contractions came fast and hard. Lucía's blood pressure spiked. The baby's heartbeat became irregular. At 11 p.m., Dr. Ernesto Salgado made the decision: emergency cesarean. They wheeled Lucía to the operating room. Raúl waited in the hallway, smoking cigarettes, pacing. He prayed to saints he hadn't spoken to since childhood. Mateo was born at 11:47 p.m. He cried immediately, a strong, healthy cry that echoed down the corridor. 4 kilograms, 52 centimeters. Brown eyes, black hair, and the birthmark on his left shoulder, comma-shaped the size of a peso coin. Dr. Salgado wrapped him in a hospital blanket and showed him to Raúl through the operating room window. Raúl wept. He'd never seen anything so perfect. They took Mateo to the nursery. Lucía was moved to recovery. The anesthesia made her groggy. She saw her son once, through the viewing window, bundled in white, sleeping under a warming lamp. Then exhaustion pulled her under. Hospital General de Morelia was a three-story concrete building built in 1956. The maternity ward occupied the second floor. It held 12 mothers, and that week, 17 newborns. The nursery was a long room with glass windows facing the corridor. Inside were rows of plastic bassinets, each labeled with the mother's last name and the baby's sex. Security was minimal. One guard at the main entrance checking visitor IDs, a logbook at the nursery door where staff signed in and out. Anyone in a white coat could enter if they wrote a name and time. The nurses knew each other, but turnover was high. Young women trained for a year, then left for better-paying jobs in private clinics or moved to Mexico City. In July 1982, 3 nurses on the maternity ward were new. Elena Ruiz was one of them. She was 23, 3 weeks into her first solo shifts. She was conscientious, nervous, eager to prove herself. She followed protocols exactly. She double-checked charts. She washed her hands before touching each baby. On July 14th, Elena worked the afternoon shift, noon to 8. The ward was quiet. Most mothers were resting. Babies slept or fed. Elena sat at the nursery desk, updating records. At approximately 2:30 p.m., a woman entered. She wore a nurse's uniform, white dress, white shoes, hair pinned back. She had a surgical mask covering the lower half of her face. She carried a clipboard. The woman approached Elena. She said, "Doctor." Salgado had ordered blood work for the Cervantes baby. Elena frowned. She checked the chart. No such order. The woman smiled. Elena could see it in her eyes above the mask. The woman said the doctor had called it in 5 minutes ago. It wasn't on the chart yet. Elena hesitated. Protocol was clear. No baby left the nursery without written orders. But doctors sometimes called ahead, and the woman seemed confident, professional. Elena said she needed to confirm with Dr. Salgado. The woman nodded, said she'd wait. Elena left the nursery, walked down the corridor to the nurse's station. She asked the charge nurse to page Dr. Salgado. The charge nurse picked up the phone, dialed. Dr. Salgado was in surgery, wouldn't be available for another hour. Elena felt a twist in her stomach. She hurried back to the nursery. 4 minutes. She'd been gone 4 minutes. When she entered, the woman was gone. So was baby Mateo's bassinet. Elena's breath caught. She ran to the hallway. Empty. She checked the service stairs at the end of the corridor. Nothing. She checked the supply closet, the bathroom. Nothing. She ran back to the charge nurse, voice shaking. The charge nurse didn't believe her at first. Then she saw Elena's face. They called security. The guard at the main entrance said no one matching that description had passed. They alerted the entire hospital. Staff searched every floor, storage rooms, laundry, the basement, the parking structure. The woman and the baby had vanished. At 3:15 p.m., they called the police. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. They interviewed Elena, the charge nurse, the security guard. They reviewed the logbook. No entry for anyone matching the woman's description. They questioned every staff member on duty. No one had seen a nurse with a baby leaving the building. It was as if she'd dissolved into air. By 4 p.m., more officers arrived. They established a perimeter around the hospital. They set up roadblocks on the highways leading out of Morelia, north toward Salamanca, south toward Uruapan, east toward Mexico City. They stopped vehicles, checked trunks, questioned drivers. They found nothing. Lucia couldn't stand. The stitches from her cesarean tore when she tried to get out of bed. A nurse had to sedate her. Raúl arrived at 5:30 p.m., came straight from work, still in his delivery uniform, smelling of diesel. A police officer met him at the entrance, explained what happened. Raúl didn't understand. He made the officer repeat it 3 times. Then he ran to Lucia's room. She was screaming. Sedation hadn't worked. Raúl held her. She clawed at him, at the air, at nothing. She screamed Mateo's name until her voice broke. Nurses tried to calm her. Nothing worked. Finally, a doctor administered a stronger sedative. Lucia's eyes rolled back. She went limp in Raúl's arms. The police took their statements that night. What enemies did they have? None. Were they involved in anything illegal? No. Did anyone know about the baby? Just family, Lucia's mother, Raúl's two brothers, some co-workers at the factory. The questions felt like accusations. The officers kept asking the same things in different ways, as if waiting for Raúl to slip, to reveal some hidden motive. Raúl's hands shook when he signed the report. He'd never felt so powerless. The newspapers ran the story the next morning. Bebé desaparece del Hospital General. A photograph of Lucia holding Mateo's blanket, her face hollow with shock. The story spread. Radio stations picked it up. Television news showed footage of the hospital, interviews with staff. Tips flooded the police station. A woman in Pátzcuaro claimed she'd seen a nurse with a baby boarding a bus to Lázaro Cárdenas at 3:45 p.m. on July 14th. A man in Uruapan said his neighbor, a single woman, had suddenly acquired an infant. A shopkeeper in Zamora said a suspicious-looking woman had bought baby formula and diapers on July 15th, paid in cash, wouldn't make eye contact. Police followed every lead. The woman in Pátzcuaro turned out to be a mother traveling with her own child, born 3 weeks earlier at a clinic in Morelia. Documentation confirmed it. The neighbor in Uruapan had given birth at home, attended by a registered midwife. The woman in Zamora was a grandmother buying supplies for her daughter. Every lead dissolved into nothing. Raúl stopped working. He couldn't focus. He'd be driving a delivery truck and suddenly pull over, shaking, unable to remember where he was supposed to go. His boss gave him 2 weeks, then a month, then told him gently that he needed to find someone else. Raúl didn't care. He spent his days driving through villages around Morelia, showing people a sketch artist's rendering of what Mateo might look like at 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. He plastered posters on telephone poles, bus stops, market walls. ¿Has visto a este niño? Have you seen this child? Lucia returned to the factory in September. Her supervisor had held her position, though she wasn't required to. Lucia needed the routine, the distraction, but she couldn't focus. She sewed crooked seams. She missed defects. Her supervisor moved her to sorting, less skilled, lower pay, but less precision required. Lucia barely spoke. She arrived, worked, left. At night, she'd lie awake, listening to trains rattle past, wondering if Mateo could hear trains wherever he was. She had dreams. In them, Mateo was crying somewhere close, the next room, the neighbor's house, just beyond a wall she couldn't see through. She'd search frantically, following the sound, but never find him. She'd wake up gasping, Raúl holding her, whispering that it was just a dream. But it wasn't. It was real. Mateo was crying somewhere and she couldn't reach him. The police investigation stalled by October. They'd interviewed hundreds of people, followed dozens of leads, found nothing. Elena Ruiz, the nurse, gave inconsistent descriptions of the woman who took Mateo. First she said the woman was tall, maybe 170 centimeters. Then she said average height, 160. First she said the woman had dark brown eyes. Then she said she wasn't sure, maybe hazel. The mask had covered most of her face. Elena couldn't remember if the woman wore a wedding ring, earrings, makeup. She remembered the clipboard, the white uniform, the confidence in the woman's voice. But those details didn't narrow the search. One detective refused to let the case die. Héctor Villalobos was 52, a 28-year veteran of the Michoacán State Police. He'd worked homicides, narcotics, kidnappings. He'd seen terrible things, but the Cervantes case haunted him differently. Maybe because he had a grandson the same age Mateo would have been. Maybe because the cruelty felt so intimate. A mother's arms, suddenly empty. Villalobos interviewed Elena Ruiz 6 more times over the next year. He walked her through every detail, every sense, memory. What did the woman smell like? Soap, Elena thought. Clean. Did she have an accent? No, she spoke like someone from Morelia. Was she nervous? No, calm, too calm. Villalobos took notes, built a profile. The woman wasn't a professional criminal. Professionals left fewer traces, worked faster. This woman had improvised, found a uniform, walked in, walked out. It suggested desperation, not calculation. Villalobos reviewed hospital employment records. He tracked down every nurse who'd worked at Hospital General in July 1982, 37 women. He interviewed each one. All had alibis. He expanded the search. Nurses who'd quit in the previous 6 months, nurses who'd been fired, nurses who'd trained but never got licensed. None matched. He examined the theory that it was an inside job, someone who knew the ward's rhythms, the security gaps, Elena's inexperience. But hospital staff who'd been on duty that day all underwent polygraph tests. All passed. Villalobos hit a wall. He pursued a different angle. Illegal adoptions. In the early 1980s, private adoptions in Mexico operated in a legal gray zone. Wealthy families who couldn't conceive sometimes paid intermediaries, lawyers, doctors, social workers, to procure infants. The transactions happened in shadows. A poor woman would give birth, sign papers she didn't understand, receive cash, or a baby would be taken from a hospital, given falsified documents, delivered to a family in another state. No questions asked. Villalobos contacted adoption lawyers in Morelia, Guadalajara, Mexico City. He asked about suspicious adoptions in July or August 1982. Most refused to talk. One lawyer, after Villalobos pressed him, admitted he'd heard rumors. Babies were being moved. But he didn't know names, didn't know specifics. Villalobos contacted orphanages, church groups that facilitated adoptions. He found more rumors, no evidence. He traveled to Guadalajara, spent 3 days interviewing pediatricians who treated newly adopted infants. One doctor remembered a couple who brought in a baby boy in August 1982. The baby had no medical records. The couple claimed they'd adopted privately, through a church. The doctor was suspicious, but had no grounds to report anything. Villalobos tracked down the couple. The baby, now a toddler, had been born in Jalisco, documented by hospital records, not Mateo. By 1983, Villalobos had exhausted every angle. He wrote a final report, 43 pages, detailing every interview, every lead, every dead end. He concluded that baby Mateo had been taken by someone who wanted a child, likely a woman who couldn't conceive, possibly acting alone, probably still in Mexico. The trail ended there. Villalobos retired in 1984. He kept a copy of the file in his home office. Sometimes, late at night, he'd open it, read through, wonder what he'd missed. A new detective was assigned to the case, then another. Each reviewed the file, found nothing new, moved on. The case became a reference point, a cautionary tale taught to hospital administrators about security protocols. But for the people who lived it, it remained open. Lucía and Raúl's marriage frayed. They didn't fight. They didn't blame each other. But the loss sat between them like a third presence. Raúl grew quiet, withdrawn. He took a job at a mechanic's shop, worked long hours. Lucía worked, came home, cooked, slept. They moved through routines like ghosts. They rarely made love. When they did, Lucía cried after. In 1985, Lucía became pregnant again. She didn't tell Raúl until she was 4 months along, afraid to hope. The pregnancy was easier this time. A girl born in March 1986, they named her Clara. Raúl held her in the hospital, terrified. He didn't let her out of his sight. When they brought Clara home, he installed locks on every window, a deadbolt on the front door. He slept lightly, waking at every sound. Clara grew up in the shadow of her missing brother. She saw his face in the posters Lucia still hung every year. She heard his name whispered in prayers. She learned early not to ask too many questions. Her parents loved her fiercely, but she always felt there was a space beside her, a brother-shaped hole. Lucia never stopped searching. She joined a support group in 1987, Families of Missing Children. They met monthly in a church basement, mothers and fathers and siblings, all carrying the same weight. They shared leads, strategies, grief. Lucia found some comfort there. She wasn't alone. She plastered posters across Michoacán, Morelia, Pátzcuaro, Uruapan, Zamora, Zitácuaro. She hired a photographer to age-progress Mateo's infant photo. At 5 years old, he'd look like this. At 10, like this. She distributed the images. Every year on July 11th, she placed an ad in El Sol de Morelia. Mateo Cervantes, born July 11, 1982, still loved, still searched for. If you have information, call. She listed her phone number. She scanned faces everywhere, markets, bus stations, schools. She approached mothers with boys the right age. "Excuse me, how old is your son?" 8. "Do you mind if I look at him?" Most women indulged her. Some grew angry, told her to leave them alone. One woman threatened to call the police. Lucia apologized, walked away, kept searching. In 1990, a psychic contacted Lucia. The woman said she'd had a vision. Mateo was alive, living near the coast, raised by a doctor's family in Lázaro Cárdenas. She could see him clearly. Dark hair, brown eyes, the birthmark. Lucia wanted to dismiss it, but desperation is a powerful thing. She drove to Lázaro Cárdenas, walked the streets, knocked on doors. "Do you know a doctor with an 8-year-old son?" She spent 3 days there, found nothing. The psychic called again, asked for money to clarify the vision. Lucia hung up. She drove home, feeling like a fool. In 1994, a lawyer in Guadalajara called. He represented a couple who'd adopted a boy in 1982 under questionable circumstances. The boy was now 12. The adoptive parents, older now, facing mortality, wanted to clear their conscience. The lawyer had seen one of Lucia's posters. The ages matched. Would Lucia be willing to meet? Lucia and Raúl traveled to Guadalajara, hearts pounding. The lawyer arranged a meeting in his office. The adoptive parents were there, a doctor and his wife. The boy was at school, they explained. In August 1982, a woman had approached them. She said she knew of a newborn who needed a family. No questions. They'd paid 20,000 pesos. The woman gave them the baby, a boy, 1 month old, and disappeared. They'd forged a birth certificate, bribed a clerk. Lucia asked to see the boy. They brought him to the office the next day. He was tall for 12, shy, polite. He had brown eyes, but he didn't have the birthmark. Lucia asked to check. The boy lifted his shirt, smooth skin, no comma. Lucia's breath left her. Raúl asked if they could do a blood test anyway. The doctor agreed. The results came back a week later. Not a match. The boy was not Mateo. Lucia wept in the lawyer's office. The doctor and his wife apologized for raising hopes, for the confusion. Lucia didn't blame them. She thanked them for trying. Raúl drove them home, 4 hours in silence. But everything changed in 1997. It began not with Lucia, not with police, but with a woman named Carmen Soto who was preparing to die. Carmen had worked as an administrative assistant at Hospital General de Morelia from 1979 to 1985. She handled paperwork, employee files, supply orders, incident reports. She retired early at 53, moved to Querétaro to live with her daughter, Sofia. She spent her retirement gardening, reading, doting on grandchildren. In April 1997, Carmen was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors gave her 6 months, maybe less. She decided to spend that time sorting her affairs. She gave away clothes, jewelry, books. She wrote letters to her children. She organized financial documents. In the back of her bedroom closet, she found a cardboard box she didn't remember packing. Inside were files from the hospital, old incident reports, memos, meeting notes, and a roll of 35mm film, still in its canister, undeveloped. Carmen stared at the film. She had a vague memory. Summer 1982. There'd been an incident, a baby taken from the maternity ward. Administration had panicked. They'd asked Carmen to document security protocols, photograph entry points, assess vulnerabilities. She'd walked the ward with her camera, a simple point-and-shoot she used for family photos. She'd taken pictures of hallways, doors, the nursery, staff. Then the investigation had gone nowhere, and she'd filed everything away. She must have forgotten to develop the film. Carmen's daughter, Sofia, took the film to a photo lab in Querétaro. When the prints came back 3 days later, Sofia didn't understand what she was looking at. 12 photos. Dated July 1982 by the lab's stamp on the back. Hospital corridors, the maternity ward, the nursery window. One photo showed 2 women talking near the viewing glass. One woman wore a nurse's uniform, the other wore street clothes, a floral dress, sunglasses pushed up on her head. Sofia brought the photos to her mother. Carmen studied them, memory stirring. She remembered now. She'd taken these photos on July 15th, 1982, the day after the baby disappeared. Administration wanted documentation for their review. Carmen had photographed staff and visitors to show how easily someone could blend in, how lax security was. She'd snapped the photo of the 2 women without thinking, just showing the nursery's sightlines. She didn't know who they were. Carmen told Sofia to take the photos to the police in Morelia. Sofia hesitated. The case was 15 years old, but Carmen insisted. She had weeks left. She wanted this weight lifted. Sofia traveled to Morelia, went to the police station, asked to speak with someone about the Cervantes case. The officer at the desk barely remembered it. He took the photos, said he'd file them. Sofia pressed. The officer promised to pass them to a detective. Sofia left, unsure if anything would happen. Nothing did. The photos sat in a file for 2 months, but Sofia was persistent. She contacted a journalist, Laura Estrada, who worked for La Voz de Michoacán. Laura had covered crime and social issues for 12 years. She'd written about missing persons cases before. She met Sofia at a cafe, reviewed the photos, felt the old instinct. This might be something. Laura began by identifying the women in the photographs. She contacted Hospital General de Morelia, requested employee records from 1982. She encountered resistance, privacy laws, bureaucracy. She filed formal requests, cited public interest. Finally, she received a list of nurses who'd worked the maternity ward in July 1982. She cross-referenced with the original police reports. One name stood out, Elena Ruiz. Laura tracked Elena down. She was now 46, working at a small clinic in Uruapan. Laura called. Elena was reluctant at first. She'd tried to forget. The guilt had never left. But Laura persisted. She said she had new evidence. Elena agreed to meet. They sat in a cafe in Uruapan. Laura showed Elena the photos. Elena's hands trembled. She stared at the image of the 2 women. She pointed at the woman in the floral dress. "That's her," Elena said quietly. "That's the woman who took the baby." Laura pressed her. "Are you certain?" 15 years had passed. Elena nodded. She'd seen that face in nightmares for 15 years. The woman had been standing near the nursery window before she came inside. Elena had noticed her briefly, just a visitor looking at babies. Then she'd come back wearing a nurse's uniform. Elena hadn't connected it at the time. She did now. Laura asked why Elena had never mentioned the dress, the sunglasses, seeing the woman before. Elena's voice broke. No one had asked. The police focused on the nurse's uniform. They asked about height, eye color, hair. They never asked if Elena had seen the woman before she put on the uniform. Elena had been young, traumatized, overwhelmed. She'd answered the questions she was asked, nothing more. Laura took the photo to a forensic specialist in Mexico City, a retired police photographer who did enhancement work. The specialist scanned the image, used software to sharpen resolution, isolated the woman's face. The quality was poor. 1982 film, fluorescent hospital lighting, a face partially obscured by sunglasses. But it was enough. A face, a floral dress, something concrete. Laura published the photo in La Voz de Michoacán in October 1997. Front page, headline, "Reconoce esta mujer?" But do you recognize this woman? 15 years after baby Mateo's disappearance, new evidence. Laura included Elena's statement, Carmen Soto's story, the timeline. The response was immediate. The newspaper's phone lines jammed. Dozens of people called. Most were false leads, people seeing what they wanted to see, projecting faces onto a blurry photograph. But one call was different. Alberto Fuentes called from Zamora. He was 61, a retired shopkeeper. He told Laura the woman in the photo was his ex-wife, Teresa Ibarra. Laura drove to Zamora the next day. Alberto lived in a small house near the Central Plaza. He invited her in, offered coffee. He seemed nervous, ashamed. He said he'd been carrying this secret for 15 years. He'd told himself it couldn't be true, but seeing the photo, he couldn't deny it anymore. Alberto and Teresa married in 1975. She was 28, he was 39. She'd been married before, divorced. They met at the shop where Alberto worked. She bought fabric for sewing. They dated for 6 months, married quietly. No big wedding. Teresa had wanted children immediately. They tried for 2 years. Nothing happened. They saw doctors. Teresa couldn't conceive, scarring from a previous infection. The doctors said adoption was an option. But adoption cost money they didn't have, required paperwork they couldn't navigate. Teresa became obsessed. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping. She talked about children constantly. She'd see mothers with babies in the street and cry. Alberto tried to console her, told her they could be happy without children. She didn't believe him. In early July 1982, Teresa told Alberto she needed to visit her sister in Morelia. She'd be gone a few days. Alberto thought the trip might help. Teresa came back on July 15th. She was different, agitated, secretive. She said her sister was pregnant, having complications. Teresa wanted to go back, stay longer. Alberto said fine. He was worried about her, but he didn't know what else to do. On July 28th, Teresa came home with a baby, a boy. She was radiant. Alberto was shocked. She said she'd been pregnant. She'd hidden it from him because of the previous losses. She didn't want to raise his hopes. She'd given birth at a private clinic in Morelia. The baby was healthy. They had a son. Alberto was confused. Teresa hadn't looked pregnant. Her body hadn't changed. She said she'd gained weight carefully, worn loose clothes. She'd been seeing a specialist who told her not to tell anyone until the pregnancy was safe. Alberto wanted to believe her, but something felt wrong. He asked to see the birth certificate. Teresa said it would come in the mail. Weeks passed, no certificate. He asked about the clinic. Teresa said it was small, private, didn't advertise. He asked for the doctor's name. She gave a name Alberto later discovered didn't exist. He asked to see medical records. Teresa became defensive, angry. She accused him of not trusting her, of not being grateful for their son. They named the baby Tomas. Teresa was overjoyed. She doted on him, barely let Alberto hold him. Alberto tried to share her happiness, but he couldn't shake the unease. He looked at the baby, 4 weeks old, healthy, with a comma-shaped birthmark on his left shoulder, and wondered where he'd really come from. In September, Alberto contacted the clinic Teresa had mentioned. It didn't exist. He confronted her. She screamed at him, called him paranoid, threatened to leave. They fought constantly. Teresa became more secretive. She stopped letting Alberto handle any of the baby's documents. She said she'd take care of it. In February 1983, Teresa packed a bag, took Tomás, and left. She said she was visiting her sister again. She didn't come back. Alberto called her sister. Teresa hadn't been there. He searched for her, contacted family, friends, police. No one knew where she was. She'd vanished. Alberto told Laura he'd suspected the truth. Deep down, he'd known something was wrong, but he didn't report it. He was ashamed. He didn't want to believe his wife had stolen a child, and part of him, he admitted with tears in his eyes, didn't want to lose Tomás. He'd held that baby, fed him, loved him. By the time Alberto convinced himself to act, they were gone. Laura contacted Detective Isabel Montes, who'd taken over the Cervantes case after Villalobos retired. Isabel was 39, 15 years on the force, known for tenacity. She reviewed Laura's findings, the photo, Elena's testimony, Alberto's statement. It was enough. She put out a search for Teresa Ibarra. Teresa wasn't hiding. She was living in Aguascalientes, working as a seamstress in a small shop. She'd lived there since 1990, under her own name, with no attempts to conceal her identity. She'd simply moved, started over, raised Tomás. No one had come looking. Isabel traveled to Aguascalientes with 2 officers. They found Teresa's apartment, a 3rd-floor walk-up in a modest building. They knocked. Teresa answered. She was 53, grey hair, lines around her eyes, hands stained with fabric dye. She looked like a tired seamstress. Nothing more. They brought her to the local police station. Isabel explained why they were there. Teresa denied everything at first. No, she didn't steal a baby. No, she'd never been to Hospital General de Morelia. No, that wasn't her in the photo. Isabel showed her Alberto's statement. Teresa's face changed. She said Alberto was lying, trying to hurt her. Isabel showed her the photo again, enhanced, clear. Teresa stared at it for a long time. Then she broke. She confessed. All of it. Teresa said she'd been at the hospital that day, July 14th, 1982, not as a nurse but visiting a friend who'd just given birth. She'd wandered the ward, restless, aching. She'd looked through the nursery window at the rows of babies. She'd seen Mateo, and something inside her snapped. She'd wanted a child for so long. The doctor said it was impossible. Her husband was distant, pitied her. Her friends whispered behind her back. She looked at that baby and thought, he could be mine. She didn't plan it. It happened in a moment. She found a nurse's uniform in a laundry cart. Someone had left it there. She put it on, pinned her hair back, put on a surgical mask she found in a supply closet. She walked into the nursery. The young nurse, Elena, was at the desk. Teresa said the doctor had ordered tests. Elena hesitated. Teresa said the doctor had called it in. Elena left to confirm. Teresa didn't wait. She took the baby, walked down the service stairs, found a bathroom on the 1st floor. She removed the uniform, stuffed it in a trash bin, walked out through a side exit. She carried Mateo wrapped in her jacket. No one stopped her. She took a taxi to the bus station. She took a bus to Zamora, that easily. Teresa raised Tomás as her own. She loved him fiercely, desperately. She never told him the truth. She forged a birth certificate, paid a clerk 500 pesos. When Alberto questioned her, she lied, then fled. She moved from city to city, Zamora, Guadalajara, Colima, Aguascalientes, always afraid someone would notice Tomás had no real documentation. She bribed officials, forged school records, did whatever was necessary. Tomás never knew. Isabel asked where Tomás was now. Teresa said he was in Monterrey, working as a mechanic. He was 35, married, expecting his first child. He believed Teresa was his mother. He called her every Sunday. He sent money when she needed it. He loved her. Isabel asked if Teresa had told him the truth. Teresa shook her head. She said she couldn't. She said telling him would destroy him. Isabel said it wasn't Teresa's choice anymore. Laura Estrada contacted Lucia. 15 years had passed since the last false lead. Lucia had learned not to hope, but Laura insisted she listen. Lucia and Raúl traveled to Aguascalientes. They met Detective Montes in a government building. Isabel explained everything, the photo, Alberto's testimony, Teresa's confession. She showed them a recent photograph of Tomás. She said they'd need DNA confirmation, but she believed this was Mateo. Lucia stared at the photo. A man in mechanic's coveralls, grease on his hands, smiling at the camera. She saw Raúl's jaw, her father's nose, her own eyes. She couldn't breathe. Raúl held her hand so tightly it hurt. Isabel arranged the DNA test. First, they needed Tomás's consent. Isabel traveled to Monterrey, found him at the garage where he worked. She pulled him aside, said there were questions about his birth. Tomás laughed it off at first. He knew his mother. He had documents. Isabel showed him Teresa's confession. Tomás's smile faded. Isabel said he'd been taken from Hospital General de Morelia in 1982. His real name was Mateo Cervantes. His real parents had searched for him for 15 years. Tomás called Teresa. She was in custody but allowed phone calls. He asked if it was true. She cried, said yes. She said she loved him. She'd done it out of love. Tomás hung up. He didn't speak for 2 days. His wife, Gabriela, held him while he cried. He said he didn't know who he was anymore. The DNA test required samples from Tomás, Lucia, and Raúl. They collected them in November. The lab in Mexico City processed them. 3 weeks later, the results came back. Probability of parentage, 997%. Tomás Ibarra was Mateo Cervantes. The reunion happened in Morelia in early December 1997. Lucia insisted it be private. No cameras, no reporters, no spectacle, just family. They met in a conference room at the municipal building. Isabel arranged it. She said they could have as much time as they needed. Raúl and Lucia arrived first. Lucia wore a blue dress, her hair pinned back. She'd barely slept in weeks. Raúl wore a suit he'd bought for the occasion, the first suit he'd owned since his wedding. They sat at a long table holding hands, waiting. Tomás came with Gabriela. He was tall, 185 centimeters, broad-shouldered, with grease still under his fingernails. He'd come straight from work. He had Raúl's jawline, Lucia's eyes, dark hair graying at the temples. He wore jeans and a denim shirt. He looked terrified. Lucia stood when he entered. She approached him slowly. She reached out, touched his face. Tomás flinched, then let her. Her fingers traced his cheekbone, his jaw, his forehead, memorizing, confirming. She whispered, "Mateo." He said, "My name is Tomás." She said, "I know." They stood there for a long time. Raúl joined them. He put his hand on Tomás's shoulder. Tomás started to cry. Lucia pulled him into an embrace. He was stiff at first, then collapsed into her. Raúl wrapped his arms around both of them. They stood there, 3 strangers bound by blood and loss, trying to bridge 15 years of absence. The weeks that followed were difficult. Tomás was angry, at Teresa, at fate, at the universe. He loved the woman who raised him. She'd been a good mother, patient, loving, present. She'd made sacrifices for him, but she'd stolen him. She'd robbed him of his real family. She'd built his entire life on a lie, and now he had another mother. Lucia wanted to know everything: his childhood, his first words, his first day of school, his favorite foods. Tomás couldn't give her that. Those memories belonged to Teresa. He'd been Tomás for 35 years. He didn't know how to be Mateo. Lucia understood, but it hurt. She'd missed everything, his first steps, his first words, his scraped knees, his school plays, his first girlfriend. She'd imagined those moments for 15 years. Now she'd never have them. They built a relationship slowly, carefully. Tomás visited Morelia once a month. He brought Gabriela. Lucia cooked meals Tomás liked: mole, tamales, pozole. She learned his routines, his preferences. He drank coffee black. He didn't like spicy food. He was allergic to shellfish, small details filling in the gaps. Raúl and Tomás worked on cars together in Raúl's garage. Raúl had built it in 1992, a small shop behind the house. They rebuilt an old Volkswagen Beetle, painted it sky blue. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The work was enough. Teresa Ibarra was tried in 1998. She pleaded guilty to kidnapping. Her lawyer argued diminished capacity, psychological trauma, desperation, years of grief over infertility. He said she'd acted in a moment of irrationality, not malice. The prosecutor sought the maximum sentence, 20 years. He said Teresa had stolen 15 years from a family, caused immeasurable suffering. The judge sentenced her to 8 years. She served 5. Good behavior model prisoner, she worked in the prison's sewing workshop, taught other inmates embroidery. She wrote letters to Tomás every week. He never responded. She was released in 2003, moved back to Zamora, lived alone. Tomás wrestled with what to do. Lucia told him she'd support whatever decision he made. Raúl said the same. Gabriela said Teresa had raised him, loved him. That didn't excuse what she'd done, but it mattered. Tomás didn't know. In August 2003, Teresa died. Heart attack, sudden, alone in her apartment. A neighbor found her 2 days later. The funeral was small. A handful of people, mostly neighbors. Tomás attended. He stood at the back, didn't approach the casket. Afterward, he walked to the cemetery, stood at the grave. He brought flowers, white roses, Teresa's favorite. He stood there for an hour, crying, then left. Lucia asked him later if he'd forgiven Teresa. Tomás said he didn't know. He said forgiveness felt too simple. Teresa had given him a good life. She'd also taken his real life away. Both were true. He didn't know how to reconcile them. By 2005, Tomás had integrated both families. He visited Morelia monthly. Clara, his sister, though they barely knew each other, became close with him. She was 19, studying nursing. She and Tomás talked about the irony. She was training to work in hospitals, the place where he'd been taken. They laughed about it darkly. Tomás and Gabriela had 2 daughters, Maria, born in 1999, and Sofia, born in 2001. Lucia doted on them. She taught them to sew, to cook, to sing the songs her mother had taught her. The girls called her Abuela Lucia. They didn't fully understand the story. Too young, too complicated. They just knew she was their grandmother, and she loved them fiercely. Raúl died in 2019. Lung cancer, quick and brutal. He was 78. Before he died, he told Tomás that finding him was the second best day of his life. The first was the day he was born. Tomás held his hand, said he was sorry for the lost years. Raúl said not to be. He said, "You're here now. That's what matters." In 2022, 40 years after the disappearance, Lucia gave an interview. Laura Estrada arranged it, a retrospective piece for La Voz de Michoacán. Lucia was 63, her hair white, her hands arthritic from decades of factory work. She sat in her living room with photographs spread on the table, baby Mateo in the hospital, Tomás as a child in photos Teresa had taken, Tomás now with his family. Laura asked the same questions everyone asked. "Do you feel you got your son back?" Lucia said, "I got a piece of him. The rest belongs to the life he lived without me." "Did you forgive Teresa?" Lucia said, "Forgiveness was the wrong word." She understood Teresa's pain. She didn't excuse it, but she understood. "Would you change anything?" Lucia said, "I'd have held him longer in the hospital. I'd have never let him out of my sight. What do you want people to know? Lucia said. That if you lose someone, you keep looking. You never stop, even if it takes 40 years, even if what you find isn't what you expected. You keep looking, because not knowing is worse than any truth. Thomas visited the following week. He brought Maria and Sophia, now 23 and 21. They sat in the living room. Lucia made tamales, the way her mother had taught her. The girls helped wrap the corn husks, laughing, getting masa on their fingers. Lucia watched them, her hands folding husks from muscle memory, and felt something close to peace. The hospital changed its security protocols in 1998. Electronic bracelets for newborns, restricted nursery access, cameras, biometric locks. Too late for Mateo, but not for others. Elena Ruiz retired in 2005. She still has nightmares. She never married, never had children. She works at a small clinic in Uruapan, delivers babies, watches new mothers hold their infants, and remembers. Detective Isabel Montes closed the case in 1998. It was the most satisfying moment of her career and the most bittersweet. She kept a photograph of Lucia and Tomás at their reunion on her desk until she retired in 2015. Laura Estrada won a National Journalism Award for her reporting. She used the prize money, 50,000 pesos, to start a non-profit that helps families search for missing children. She named it Fundación Mateo. It's still operating, funded by donations, helping families navigate police bureaucracy, aging progress photos, DNA databases. Carmen Soto, the woman who found the photographs, died in November 1997. She lived long enough to know the photos mattered, that her forgotten roll of film had solved a 15-year-old mystery. Sophia, her daughter, attended Tomás and Lucia's reunion. She gave Lucia the original roll of film, still in its canister. Lucia keeps it in a wooden box on her dresser, next to Mateo's hospital bracelet and a lock of Tomás's hair from his first haircut. Teresa had saved it, sent it to him after she was released. Raúl Cervantes was buried in the cemetery on the outskirts of Morelia. His headstone reads, "Beloved father, husband, grandfather." He never stopped searching. Tomás visits once a month, brings flowers, sits on the bench nearby, talks to the stone. He tells Raúl about his daughters, about work, about life. He says things he couldn't say when Raúl was alive. Tomás still goes by Tomás. He legally added Cervantes to his name, Tomás Ibarra Cervantes. His daughters know the story. He sat them down when they were teenagers, told them everything. They asked questions. How do you feel about Teresa? Tomás said, I loved her. I still do. But what she did was wrong. Both things are true. On July 11th each year, Tomás's birthday, or Mateo's, depending on how you look at it, Lucia no longer places an ad in the newspaper. Instead, she lights a candle in the chapel where she married Raúl, where she prayed for 40 years. She sits in the same pew, hands folded, and thinks about the years lost, the years found. She whispers both names, Mateo, Tomás. Both are true. Both are her son.